You are watching a system in panic mode, and you need to understand exactly why this matters to you, your family, and your bank account. We are not just talking about some high-level legal dispute in Washington that you can tune out. We are talking about the weaponization of the American justice system to destroy political opponents, and if they can do it to the former president's inner circle, do not think for a second that they won't turn that same machinery against you. The recent theatrics from Congressman Jamie Raskin regarding Donald Trump's use of the pardon power are not about justice or accountability, despite what the mainstream media wants to spoon-feed you. This is about power, plain and simple, and the outrage you are hearing is the sound of the permanent political class realizing they lost a round in their game of lawfare. Let's get real about what is actually happening here, because the lens through which the Democrats are framing this is distorted by years of Trump derangement syndrome. They want you to believe that utilizing the pardon power, a power explicitly granted to the president by the Founding Fathers in the Constitution, is somehow a criminal act or an abuse of office. What they are really angry about is that Donald Trump dared to use his constitutional authority to neutralize their favorite weapon, the ability to bankrupt, imprison, and silence anyone who threatens the status quo. When Raskin complains that these pardons wiped away financial penalties, he is essentially complaining that the government was robbed of its ability to financially ruin its enemies. Think about the precedent they are trying to set here and how it bleeds down to the average citizen. If the government can target you, manufacture a crime, or trap you in a perjury trap because you misremembered a date from 3 years ago, and then slap you with millions of dollars in fines just to bleed you dry, that is not justice, that is persecution. The only fail-safe mechanism the Constitution offers against a runaway, vindictive prosecutor or a biased judge is the presidential pardon. By attacking this power, the Democrats are telling you that once the deep state has you in its crosshairs, there should be no escape, no mercy, and no higher authority to step in and say enough is enough. Jamie Raskin stands there with a straight face and talks about the erosion of accountability, which is rich coming from a party that has spent years shielding its own from any semblance of consequences. Where is the accountability for the fabricated Russia collusion hoax that tore this country apart for 3 years? Where is the financial restitution for the millions of taxpayer dollars wasted on witch hunts that turned up absolutely nothing? They don't care about accountability. They care about maintaining a monopoly on punishment. They view the Department of Justice not as a blind arbiter of the law, but as a hammer to crush dissent, and Trump's pardons took that hammer out of their hands. We have to look at the specific language Raskin is using because it is designed to trigger an emotional response rather than a logical one. He talks about a pay-to-play system, implying that these pardons were bought and sold, which is a disgusting projection of how Washington has operated for decades under the nose of career politicians like himself. The reality is that many of the people Trump pardoned were victims of a two-tiered justice system that sought to punish them solely for their proximity to Donald Trump. These were process crimes, politically motivated prosecutions, and attempts to coerce testimony, tactics that belong in a banana republic, not the United States of America. When Trump stepped in and wiped away those sentences and those fines, he wasn't selling justice, he was restoring it. He was sending a message that the executive branch will not sit idly by while the judicial branch is weaponized by partisan actors. The left is furious because they spent years building these cases, leaking to the press, and destroying reputations, only to have Trump undo it all with the stroke of a pen. It drives them crazy because it reminds them that they do not have absolute control, and if there is one thing the swamp hates more than anything else, it is losing control over the narrative and the outcome. You have to understand the sheer hypocrisy of Raskin complaining about financial penalties being waived. These fines that were levied against Trump's associates were often exorbitant and designed to ensure that these men would be destitute, unable to fight back, and serve as a warning to anyone else thinking about joining the MAGA movement. It is a mafia tactic. destroy the lieutenant to send a message to the boss. By nullifying these debts, Trump didn't just free individuals. He broke the financial stranglehold that the establishment tries to use to enforce compliance. The media will parrot Raskin's talking points, claiming that this undermines the rule of law, but the true threat to the rule of law is a justice system that targets individuals based on their political affiliation. We have watched for years as Antifa rioters destroy federal property and walk away with zero consequences, while grandmothers walking through the Capitol are hunted down like terrorists. That is the system Raskin is defending. That is the accountability he claims is being eroded. When he says Trump's actions are an attack on government oversight, what he really means is that Trump attacked the bureaucracy's ability to function as a protection racket for the Democratic Party. Let's go deeper into this concept of government oversight that Raskin is so worried about. He mentions inspector generals being fired and ethics rules being ignored, painting a picture of chaos. But let's use some common sense here. The executive branch is unilaterally led by the President of the United States, not by unelected bureaucrats who think they know better than the voters. The President has the right to fire subordinates who are undermining his agenda or leaking to the press. The left has convinced themselves that the interagency and the civil service are a fourth branch of government that is untouchable, but the Constitution says otherwise. Trump's refusal to bow down to these unelected gatekeepers is exactly why 75 million Americans voted for him. We didn't vote for the Inspector General of the intelligence community. We voted for Donald J. Trump. When these bureaucrats actively work to sabotage the administration, firing them isn't a scandal, it's effective management. Raskin tries to frame this as an assault on democracy, but in reality, asserting control over the unelected bureaucracy is the ultimate act of democratic accountability because it ensures that the person elected by the people is actually the one in charge. The narrative that Raskin is pushing, that these pardons create a system where you can pay for leniency, is a deliberate distraction from the actual pay-for-play schemes that we have seen unfold in real time involving foreign nations and massive wire transfers to shell companies linked to other political families. They accuse Trump of what they are guilty of to muddy the waters. The people Trump pardoned didn't pay him. They paid a heavy price for their loyalty to him and their country, having their lives turned upside down by prosecutors who were out for blood. Trump's act of clemency was an act of loyalty in return, standing by the people who stood by him when the entire world was against them. This brings us to the core philosophical difference between us and them. To the left, the law is a tool to engineer society and punish deviation from their orthodoxy. To them, justice means the total destruction of their enemies. To a conservative, to a patriot, the law is meant to protect liberty, and the pardon power is the safety valve for when the law becomes an instrument of injustice. The Founding Fathers, specifically Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist Papers, argued that the pardon power should be vested in a single individual precisely so it could be used boldly in times of political turbulence to restore tranquility. Trump used it exactly as intended. Raskin's rhetoric about the erosion of trust is laughable when you consider that trust in our institutions has cratered precisely because of the behavior of people like him. They dragged the country through 2 sham impeachments, weaponized the intelligence agencies, and turned the FBI into their personal police force. And now they have the audacity to lecture us about trust? The American people don't trust the system because they see with their own eyes that there is one set of rules for the elite liberal establishment and another set of rules for everyone else. Trump's pardons didn't cause that distrust. They were a necessary response to the corruption that caused it. We need to talk about the financial aspect again because this is where Raskin really shows his hand. He is obsessed with the money. He talks about millions of dollars in restitution as if that money was going to pave roads or build schools. In these federal cases, that money usually vanishes into the black hole of the General Treasury or is used to fund more bureaucratic overreach. By focusing on the money, Raskin reveals that he views the justice system as a revenue generator and a tool for wealth confiscation. It is about stripping power and resources from the opposition. The idea that these pardons place the president above the law is legally illiterate. The pardon power is part of the law. It is Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution. You cannot violate the law by exercising a power granted by the supreme law of the land. What Raskin is actually arguing is that the president should be subservient to the Department of Justice, that an elected leader should bow to the will of appointed prosecutors. That is not a republic. That is a prosecutorial oligarchy. We elected a president to lead, not to ask permission from the DOJ before he makes a move. Furthermore, let's look at the timing of these complaints. Raskin is bringing this up now to keep the specter of Trump the criminal alive in the minds of the public. They know they cannot beat him on policy. They cannot beat him on the economy. They cannot beat him on the border. So, they have to run this tired script that he is a lawless dictator. But the American people are waking up. They see that the lawlessness was actually the fortitude to stand up against a rigged system. Every time Raskin opens his mouth to complain about a pardon, he reminds the base that Trump is the only one willing to fight for his people. The victims Raskin refers to in these financial fraud cases are often large institutions or the government itself, abstract entities that were hardly victimized in the traditional sense. In many of these white-collar cases that the DOJ loves to pursue against political targets, the crime is often a technical violation of an obscure regulation that no normal person would even know existed. They parse every email, every bank transfer, looking for a hook. When Trump wiped those slates clean, he was rejecting the criminalization of politics. He was saying that we are not going to let the DOJ decide who gets to participate in public life by bankrupting them with legal fees and fines. We also have to address the sheer arrogance of Raskin's tone. He speaks as if he is the high priest of morality, handing down judgment from on high. This is typical of the coastal elite who believe they possess a superior intellect and a moral monopoly. They truly believe that they are the only ones fit to govern and that any challenge to their authority is illegitimate. Trump's pardons were a slap in the face to that arrogance. They were a reminder that their judgments are not final, that their power is not absolute, and that there is a check on their ambition. When Raskin talks about the foundations of public trust, he is mourning the loss of the public's blind faith in the institutions he controls. He wants you to trust the FBI blindly, even after we know they lied to the FISA court. He wants you to trust the DOJ, even after they targeted parents at school board meetings. Trump's actions expose the rot. By pardoning the victims of this corruption, he shined a light on the fact that the convictions were unjust in the first place. You don't pardon someone who had a fair trial and a just sentence. You pardon someone who was railroaded. The implication that these pardons encourage future criminality is another scare tactic. The argument goes that if the president's friends know they will be pardoned, they will commit crimes with impunity. But what crimes are we talking about? We are talking about process crimes created by the investigation itself. If there were no witch hunt, there would be no process crimes. The solution isn't to restrict the pardon power. The solution is to stop the politically motivated investigations that create these traps. Raskin has it completely backward. He wants to keep the trap but remove the escape hatch. We are watching a battle for the soul of the American legal system. On one side, you have the Raskin faction, who view the law as a sword to wield against their enemies, a complex web of regulations designed to ensnare and destroy. On the other side, you have the view that the law should serve the people, and that mercy and justice are two sides of the same coin. Trump's pardons were an exercise in mercy, yes, but more importantly, they were an exercise in corrective justice. He was fixing what the swamp had broken. As we move forward in this hour, we are going to dissect the specific cases Raskin is crying about. We are going to look at the details they don't tell you on the nightly news. We are going to follow the money, not the money Raskin is worried about, but the money being funneled into the NGOs and the special interest groups that drive these prosecutions. We are going to expose the network of influence that Jamie Raskin is actually protecting. Because when you peel back the layers of his outrage, you don't find a defender of the Constitution. You find a gatekeeper of the establishment, terrified that the gate has been torn down. It is crucial to remember that the pardon power is unique because it is one of the few powers that the other branches cannot touch. Congress cannot legislate it away. The Supreme Court cannot overturn it. It is the ultimate expression of the sovereign will of the people vested in one man. That is why they hate it. It is the one thing they cannot bureaucratize, regulate, or control. It is raw, unchecked executive power, and in the hands of someone like Donald Trump, who actually works for the people, it is the most dangerous weapon against the deep state that exists. So when you hear Raskin talk about justice for sale, ask yourself, who is really selling out this country? Is it the man who used his legal authority to save his people from a corrupt system? Or is it the politicians who have sold our jobs to China, our borders to the cartels, and our judicial system to the highest bidder? The projection is off the charts. They accuse Trump of what they do every single day. They have turned the government into a marketplace where influence is bought, and justice is just another commodity. Let's drill down into these so-called financial penalties that Raskin is weeping over, because he acts like this money was stolen from the pockets of orphans. In reality, these were punitive fines often concocted by prosecutors who knew they couldn't get a solid conviction on the primary charges, so they went for the wallet. It is a tactic as old as time. If you can't lock them up forever, make sure they can never afford to hire a lawyer or support a candidate again. By wiping away these debts, Trump didn't rob the taxpayer. He stopped the government from robbing private citizens. He recognized that the process was the punishment, and the financial ruin was the goal, not a byproduct. This is what the establishment fears most, a leader who understands their playbook and is willing to burn it. They rely on the threat of financial annihilation to keep people in line. When you see a General Flynn or a Roger Stone targeted, the message isn't just for them, it is for you. It says, if you step out of line, if you support the wrong candidate, we will take your house, your pension, and your future. Trump's pardons cut the wires on that explosive device. He told the deep state that their ability to financially cripple his allies was null and void. Now, consider the absolute nerve of Raskin bringing up the concept of pay-to-play in relation to Donald Trump. This is the classic Democrat maneuver. Accuse your opponent of exactly what you are doing. We are living through an era where the current administration is drowning in allegations of influence peddling, with family members receiving massive payouts from foreign entities for absolutely no discernible product or service. That is the definition of pay-to-play. Yet, Raskin ignores the big guy's 10% and focuses on Trump using his constitutional power to help people who are loyal to his vision for America. The difference is night and day. The Biden model, allegedly, is about personal enrichment at the expense of national security. The Trump model, as seen in these pardons, is about protecting political allies from a weaponized legal system. Trump didn't take money to grant these pardons. He took heat. He took the arrows from the media and the vitriol from the Raskins of the world because he knew it was the right thing to do. He prioritized loyalty and justice over his own political convenience, which is a concept completely foreign to the snakes in Washington who would sell out their own mothers for a committee chairmanship. Raskin also harps on the idea that these pardons bypass the traditional DOJ review process, clutching his pearls as if the office of the pardon attorney is some sacred priesthood. Let's be clear, the DOJ is part of the executive branch, and they work for the president, not the other way around. The president is not required to ask his subordinates for permission to exercise a power that the Constitution grants to him alone. Relying on the DOJ to vet pardons for people the DOJ unjustly prosecuted is like asking the fox to review the security of the henhouse. Of course, they would recommend against it. They are the ones who put the target on these people's backs in the first place. Bypassing the DOJ wasn't a bug in the system. It was a necessary feature. When the Department of Justice has been corrupted by partisan actors, you cannot trust their recommendations. Trump understood that the bureaucracy would never sign off on undoing their own handiwork. He had to act unilaterally because the system was incapable of correcting itself. This is what strong leadership looks like: identifying a systemic failure and having the guts to override the procedures to achieve actual justice. We also need to address Raskin's claim that this creates a system where the rich and powerful get special treatment. That is a rich irony coming from a party that is bankrolled by Silicon Valley billionaires and Wall Street hedge funds. The people Trump pardoned were not getting off because they were rich. Many of them had been drained of their wealth by the legal battles. They were getting off because they were targets. If anything, the justice system Raskin defends is the one that favors the elite who hold the correct political views. If you are a wealthy liberal donor, you can riot, loot, and launder money with little fear of federal prosecution. But if you are a conservative, the standard changes. Suddenly, obscure statutes are dusted off, and sentencing guidelines are maxed out. Trump's pardons leveled the playing field. They were a counterbalance to a system that had tipped dangerously to the left. Raskin calls this privilege, but we call it protection. It is the protection of political minorities from the tyranny of the majority faction in the bureaucracy. Without that protection, we essentially have a one-party state where the opposition is criminalized. Let's talk about the victims Raskin claims were left high and dry. In almost every single one of these political cases, there was no physical victim. No one was hurt, no property was destroyed, and no savings were stolen from grandmothers. These were crimes against the state's authority, lying to the FBI, campaign finance violations, failure to register as a foreign agent. These are administrative offenses that were elevated to high crimes because of who the defendants were. The victim was the ego of the federal prosecutors who wanted a trophy on their wall. By canceling the restitution, Trump wasn't taking money from a suffering victim. He was denying the state its spoils of war. Raskin tries to frame this as a moral failing, but the real moral failing is the criminalization of political differences. When you look at the history of the pardon power, it was often used to heal national wounds after periods of conflict. Washington used it for the whiskey rebels. Lincoln and Johnson used it after the Civil War. Carter used it for draft dodgers. Trump used it for the casualties of the cold Civil War that has been raging in this country since 2016. He was signaling that the war on his movement had to end and that he would not leave his soldiers behind on the battlefield. The focus on the eroding of accountability is also a smokescreen to hide the fact that the Democrats are terrified of the precedent Trump set. He showed future Republican presidents that they do not have to play by the left's rules. They do not have to let their administrations be dismantled by rogue prosecutors. Raskin wants to shame Trump so that no future leader dares to use the pardon power this aggressively again. He wants to re-establish the norm where the DOJ is supreme and the president is a figurehead. We cannot let that happen. The president is the only federal official elected by all the people, and his authority must remain superior to the unelected permanent state. Furthermore, Raskin's lament about inspector generals being sidelined is practically an admission of the deep state's existence. These IGs were weaponized during the Trump administration to leak damaging narratives and conduct biased investigations. They were not neutral watchdogs. They were attack dogs for the resistance within the government. Trump firing them was not an assault on oversight. It was a restoration of the chain of command. A president cannot govern if his own internal auditors are working with the opposition party to undermine him. Raskin defends them because they were his most valuable assets in the war against Trump. You have to ask yourself, why is Raskin bringing this up now? Why are they relitigating pardons from years ago? It is because they are setting the stage for the next election. They want to paint the picture that a second Trump term would be a revenge tour where he pardons himself and his allies while locking up his enemies. They are projecting their own desires onto him. They are the ones currently trying to lock up their primary political opponent. They are the ones changing laws and statutes to get him. They are terrified that if he returns, he will use the pardon power not just to free the innocent, but to completely dismantle the lawfare machine they have built. This is psychological warfare. They want you to feel ashamed of supporting a man who uses his power to protect his own. But in a world where the system is rigged, protecting your own is a virtue, not a vice. When the law is twisted into a weapon, the only moral response is to shield the innocent. Trump's pardons were an act of defiance against a corrupt establishment. He was saying, "You can come after my people, you can try to ruin them, but as long as I have this pen, I will have the final say." The ethics rules Raskin claims were ignored are often nothing more than bureaucratic handcuffs designed to keep outsiders from changing the way Washington works. They love to cite norms and traditions, but their only real tradition is self-preservation. Trump didn't come to Washington to follow their norms. He came to break them. And thank God he did. If he had followed every ethics rule written by the swamp creatures, he would have been paralyzed from day one. Ignoring their rules was necessary to get anything done for the American people. Think about the message Raskin sends when he says money can buy justice. He is trying to demoralize you. He wants you to believe the system is so broken that only billionaires can survive it. But the truth is, Trump used his power to help people who were broken by the system, people who had run out of money and options. He was the equalizer. And that is what they hate. They want a monopoly on mercy just as they want a monopoly on punishment. They want you to have to beg them for forgiveness, to kneel at the altar of the Democrat Party to get a break. Trump bypassed their altar and went straight to the Constitution. We are going to keep peeling back these layers. We need to look at the specific language Raskin uses to demonize the concept of clemency. Clemency means mercy. Why is the party that preaches compassion and criminal justice reform suddenly so opposed to mercy? Because it was mercy for the wrong people. If Trump had pardoned 1,000 nonviolent drug offenders, which, by the way, he did with the First Step Act, Raskin would barely make a peep. But because he pardoned the people who exposed the Russia hoax, the people who fought the deep state, suddenly mercy is a threat to the Republic. This selective outrage is the hallmark of the modern left. They don't have principles, they have targets. And anyone who gets in the way of their target, even if it's the President of the United States using his clear constitutional authority, must be destroyed. Raskin isn't protecting the Constitution. He's protecting the swamp's ability to hunt. And we, the people, are the prey. But as long as we understand their game, as long as we see through their concern for the rule of law, we can fight back. We can see these pardons for what they really were, acts of war against a corrupt oligarchy. Let's pivot to the elephant in the room that Jamie Raskin and his cohorts are desperately trying to hide behind their curtain of righteous indignation, the undeniable reality of a two-tiered justice system. You cannot have an honest conversation about Trump's use of the pardon power without looking at the other side of the ledger. Raskin talks about eroding accountability. But where was this passion for accountability when Hillary Clinton deleted 33,000 subpoenaed emails? Where was the demand for restitution when the Clinton Foundation was taking millions from foreign governments while she was Secretary of State? The silence from Raskin and the Democrats was deafening. This is why their moral posturing makes regular Americans sick to their stomachs. We watched as the FBI treated the Democrat elite with kid gloves, handing out immunity deals like candy, allowing suspects to destroy evidence, and rewriting exoneration statements before the investigation was even finished. But when it came to Trump's people, they kicked down doors at dawn with SWAT teams, tipped off CNN to ensure maximum humiliation, and threw men in solitary confinement to break their spirits. Trump's pardons were the only thing that balanced the scales. If the system refuses to prosecute one side for actual crimes while inventing crimes to prosecute the other, the president has a moral obligation to intervene. Raskin wants you to believe that justice means applying the law blindly, but we know that is a lie. In their hands, the law is a heat-seeking missile programmed to hit only Republicans. When Trump pardoned his associates, he wasn't putting them above the law. He was pulling them out of the snare of a weaponized bureaucracy. He was declaring that the executive branch would not enforce the double standard. If the Democrats want to talk about pay to play, let's talk about the lucrative board seats and consulting gigs that seem to magically appear for the children of Democrat politicians. Let's talk about the 10% for the big guy. That is the real pay to play, selling out American interests for personal gain. Trump's pardons involved no exchange of cash for policy. They were an exchange of freedom for fairness. The financial penalties Raskin cites were part of a strategy known as ruin by process. Even if you are innocent, defending yourself against the federal government costs millions. You have to mortgage your house, liquidate your retirement, and beg friends for help just to pay the lawyers. The government has unlimited resources. You do not. They know this. They grind you down until you are broke, and then they offer you a plea deal. Admit to this lie, and we'll let you keep your house. It is coercion, pure and simple. By wiping out the fines and the convictions, Trump was telling the DOJ that they cannot win simply by outspending the defendant. He restored the financial lives of people who had been destroyed for sport. Let's look closer at the specific mechanism Raskin is defending. He talks about the integrity of the DOJ's internal processes. But we know now, thanks to brave whistleblowers and independent investigations, that the integrity of the DOJ was compromised at the highest levels during the Trump era. We had FBI agents texting each other about their insurance policy to stop Trump. We had lawyers falsifying emails to get FISA warrants to spy on the Trump campaign. This is the process Raskin says we must respect. Respecting a corrupt process is not patriotism. It is complicity. Trump respected the Constitution enough to dismantle that corrupt process. Raskin's argument essentially boils down to this: the president is a king if he uses his powers, but the DOJ is God. He believes that unelected prosecutors should have the final word on who is free and who is caged. That is an inversion of the constitutional order. The president is the only person in the executive branch who is accountable to the voters. If the people don't like how he uses the pardon power, they can vote him out. That is the check. But who checks the career prosecutor who decides to target a political enemy? Who checks the judge who hates the president? No one. The pardon power is the people's check, exercised through their president, against a rogue judiciary. There is a psychological dimension to Raskin's attacks as well. They want to stigmatize the very idea of loyalty. In their world, loyalty to Trump is a crime, and betraying him is a virtue. Look at how they treated the people who flipped. They were celebrated by the media, given book deals, and treated as heroes. But the people who refused to lie, who refused to compose false songs to satisfy the prosecutor, were hammered. Trump's pardons were a vindication of those who stood tall. He was telling the world that in his administration, you don't get rewarded for betrayal, you get protected for integrity. Raskin claims that this undermines the jury system. But juries only hear what the judge allows them to hear. In many of these cases in D.C. and New York, the jury pools are 95% Democrat. A Trump associate walking into a D.C. courtroom has about as much chance of a fair trial as a snowball in hell. The judges often excluded exculpatory evidence, gagged the defense, and gave instructions that made conviction inevitable. The jury of peers concept is a farce when the trial is held in the enemy's stronghold. Trump understood this geography of justice. He knew his people couldn't get a fair shake in the swamp, so he used the power the founders gave him to correct that geographic bias. And let's not forget the national security angle Raskin loves to play. He implies that these pardons somehow endangered the country. How? Did Roger Stone or Paul Manafort sell nuclear secrets? Did they open the borders to terrorists? No. Their crimes were purely political and financial issues from years past that had zero impact on the safety of the American family. The real threat to national security is a government that turns its intelligence apparatus inward to spy on its own citizens. Trump's pardons didn't weaken America. They strengthened the principle that the security state cannot run roughshod over civil liberties. When Raskin talks about norms, he is talking about the unwritten rules of the Washington cocktail circuit. The norm is that you don't rock the boat. The norm is that Republicans are supposed to roll over and apologize when Democrats attack them. The norm is that when a Republican leaves office, he is supposed to fade away and let the Democrats write the history books. Trump smashed those norms. He used the pardon power aggressively, unapologetically, and effectively. He didn't ask for permission, and he didn't apologize. That is what really grinds Raskin's gears. It's not the legality, it's the audacity. We also have to consider the precedent Raskin is trying to set for the future. By criminalizing the use of the pardon power, they are trying to neuter the presidency itself. They want a weak executive who is afraid to act, a president who is constantly looking over his shoulder at the DOJ and Congress, terrified of being impeached for using his own authority. This is the parliamentarization of America, where the leader serves at the pleasure of the legislature and the bureaucracy. But we are a republic with three co-equal branches. The president is not Congress's employee. Trump reminded them of that, and they have never forgiven him. Raskin's narrative also completely ignores the history of Democrat pardons. Bill Clinton pardoned a literal fugitive billionaire, Mark Rich, whose ex-wife had donated massive sums to the Clinton Library and the Democrat Party. That was a clear, transactional, cash-for-clemency scandal. Where was Jamie Raskin then? Was he writing op-eds about the erosion of trust? Was he holding hearings about the pay-to-play scheme? Of course not. Because in their eyes, when a Democrat does it, it's compassion or correcting an oversight. When a Republican does it, it's obstruction of justice. We are done with this double standard. We are done playing by rules that only apply to one side. The victims Raskin talks about are ghosts. They don't exist. The only victims in this saga are the families of the men who were targeted. Families who had their homes raided at gunpoint. Children who watched their fathers dragged away in handcuffs on live TV for crimes that usually warrant a civil fine. Trump's pardons were an act of healing for those families. He was giving them their lives back. Raskin looks at these families and sees ATMs that the government didn't get to empty. Trump looked at them and saw Americans who had been wronged. That is the difference in the soul of the two parties right now. One sees revenue and control, the other sees people and freedom. Furthermore, Raskin's obsession with the totalitarian label for Trump is pure projection. What is more totalitarian? A president using a transparent, constitutional power to release people from prison? Or a party that tries to pack the Supreme Court, add new states to rig the Senate, abolish the Electoral College, and censor speech on social media? The Democrats are the ones dismantling the guardrails of democracy. Trump was just using the emergency brake. His pardons were a refusal to let the totalitarian instincts of the left claim any more victims. We need to keep our eyes on the ball here. This isn't just about the past, it's about the future. Raskin is building a case to say that any future Republican president who pardons a political ally is committing an impeachable offense. They are trying to rewrite the Constitution through norms and public pressure. They want to create a world where if you work for a Republican administration, you know that the DOJ can come after you, destroy you, and the president will be powerless to save you because it would look bad. They are trying to isolate the leader from his team. It is a divide and conquer strategy. Trump saw right through it. The rule of law that Raskin claims to defend has become the rule of lawyers. A specific class of Ivy League, DC-based lawyers who rotate between the DOJ, big law firms, and Democrat administrations. They write the rules, they enforce the rules, and they judge the rules. They are a closed loop. Trump was the glitch in their matrix. He didn't care about their peer approval. He cared about what was right. And in the case of these pardons, what was right was clear. Stop the bleeding. Stop the persecution. End the witch hunt. As we move into the final stretch of this analysis, we have to ask ourselves what this means for us, the people. It means that we have to stop accepting the media's framing of corruption. Real corruption is the weaponization of government power. Real corruption is using the IRS to target Tea Party groups. Real corruption is spying on a political campaign. Real corruption is burying the Hunter Biden laptop story before an election. Trump's pardons were the antidote to corruption. They were the disinfectant. Raskin can scream until he is blue in the face about financial penalties, but the American people know that you can't put a price on freedom. You can't put a price on the peace of mind of knowing that your government can't crush you just because they don't like your politics. Trump stood up for that principle. He stood up for the idea that in America, the process shouldn't be the punishment. And let's be honest, Raskin is terrified. He is terrified because he knows that if Trump returns to power, he now knows exactly where the bodies are buried. He knows exactly how the DOJ was weaponized because he saw it from the inside. And he knows that the pardon power is just one tool in the arsenal to dismantle the deep state. Raskin is launching these attacks now to try and delegitimize the tools Trump will need to clean house. He wants to take the scalpel out of the surgeon's hand before the operation begins. But it won't work. We see the game. We see that accountability is just a code word for vengeance against MAGA. We see that justice is just a code word for party loyalty. Trump exposed it all. And with every pardon he signed, he drove another nail into the coffin of the establishment's credibility. They can write their reports, they can hold their hearings, they can wring their hands, but they cannot change the fact that for 4 years, we had a president who actually fought for his people against the machine. And that is why they hate him. And that is exactly why we must support him. So, where does this leave us? We are standing at a precipice. The Jamie Raskins of the world are not just complaining about past pardons. They are drafting the blueprint for a future where the executive branch is completely neutered, subservient to a permanent, unelected ruling class. They want a president who is nothing more than a rubber stamp for the deep state's agenda. If that president dares to step out of line, if he dares to use his constitutional powers to protect his people, they want the ability to destroy him and everyone around him. This is not about the law. This is about a coup by bureaucracy. They are trying to repeal the 2016 election retroactively and rig the future by criminalizing the very tools of the presidency. You have to look at the big picture. They are building a surveillance state, a censorship industrial complex, and a weaponized justice system. They are hiring 87,000 new IRS agents. Do you think those agents are going after billionaires? No, they are coming for the middle class, for the small business owners, for the people who donate $50 to a mega candidate. They want to make sure that if you support the wrong side, they can freeze your bank account, audit your life, and destroy your credit. And what is the one thing that stands in their way? A strong executive willing to use the pardon power to say, no. That is why they are so desperate to stigmatize it. They want to remove the last line of defense between you and the Leviathan. Raskin's rhetoric is designed to make you feel like you are the criminal for supporting Trump. He talks about ethics and values. But what values are those? The value of open borders? The value of shipping our manufacturing base to China? The value of teaching our children to hate their own country? Those are the values of the modern Democrat Party. Trump's values, patriotism, loyalty, strength, borders, are what they consider unethical. When Raskin says Trump violated ethics rules, he means Trump violated the globalist code of conduct. He refused to sell out America, and for that, they will never forgive him. The financial restitution argument is the final nail in the coffin of their credibility. They treat the federal budget like their personal piggy bank to fund foreign wars and green energy boondoggles, but they scream bloody murder when Trump forgives a fine levied against a political ally. It is selective accounting at its finest. They don't care about the money, they care about the pain. They want the pain to be permanent. They want the punishment to last forever. Trump's pardons were an assertion that in America, redemption is possible, and that the government's thirst for vengeance has a limit. We are entering a time where we must be as ruthless as they are. We cannot afford to be the gentlemanly losers of the past, the Romneys and the Ryans who would rather lose with dignity than win with strength. Trump taught us that you have to fight fire with fire. If they weaponize the DOJ, you use the pardon power. If they weaponize the media, you use your own platforms. If they weaponize the bureaucracy, you fire them all. Raskin is terrified because he knows the old rules are dead. He knows that the next time a Republican takes the White House, we won't be looking for their approval. We will be looking for their resignation letters. The narrative that Trump is a threat to democracy is the greatest projection in American history. A threat to democracy is a party that tries to kick the opposition leader off the ballot. A threat to democracy is a party that colludes with big tech to silence dissent. A threat to democracy is a party that uses the FBI to raid the homes of its critics. Trump is not the threat. He is the antibody. He is the reaction to the infection that has taken hold in Washington. And his use of the pardon power was the medicine the system needed, even if it tasted bitter to the elitists in Georgetown. Let's not forget the human element here. The men Trump pardoned, Manafort, Stone, Flynn, Papadopoulos, these men had families. They had lives before they entered the meat grinder of DC politics. Raskin wants you to see them as monsters, but they were just men who got caught in the gears of a machine that wanted to chew them up to get to Trump. By pardoning them, Trump showed a humanity that is completely absent on the left. The left eats its own. Just look at how they turn on anyone who deviates from the narrative by 1 inch. The right, under Trump, protects its own. That is the difference between a cult and a movement. We need to reject Raskin's framing entirely. Do not let them tell you that justice was subverted. Justice was restored. Do not let them tell you that accountability was lost. The only accountability that matters is to the Constitution and the voters, not to the prosecutors. Do not let them tell you that trust was broken. The only way to rebuild trust in this country is to tear down the two-tiered justice system and build one that treats every American, from the plumber to the president, with the same standard of fairness. Until then, the pardon power is our shield. Raskin warns of a pay-to-play culture, but the reality is that the Democrats have created a pay-to-survive culture. If you don't pay homage to their woke ideology, you don't survive. If you don't donate to their causes, your business gets targeted. If you don't parrot their talking points, you get cancelled. Trump rejected that extortion racket. He showed us that you can stand up, you can fight back, and yes, you can win. The pardons were a victory flag planted on the battlefield of lawfare. As we wrap up this hour, I want you to take one thing away from this. The outrage you see on CNN and MSNBC, the stern lectures from Jamie Raskin, the headlines in the New York Times, it is all theater. It is a performance designed to distract you from the fact that they are losing their grip on power. They are lashing out because they are afraid. They are afraid of you. They are afraid of the movement that Donald Trump awakened. And they are afraid that the next time, the pardon power won't just be used to save the innocent. The prosecutorial power will be used to punish the guilty, the truly guilty, the ones who have sold this country down the river for decades. So let Raskin cry about financial penalties. Let him whine about norms. We know the truth. We know that in a corrupt system, the only act of rebellion is to be free. Trump freed his people. And in doing so, he reminded us that we are free people, not subjects of the state. The pardon power is absolute. The president's authority is constitutional. And the movement to take back this country is unstoppable. They can write their history books however they want, but we know what happened. We saw a man stand alone against the wind, shielding his friends from the storm. That is leadership. That is courage. And that is why, no matter what they throw at him, indictments, fines, smears, or impeachments, Donald J. Trump remains the single most dominant force in American politics. Because he fights. And as long as he fights for us, we will fight for him. Stay strong, patriots. Do not let their lies penetrate your resolve. The truth is on our side, the Constitution is on our side, and if we hold the line, victory is on our side. This has been a deep dive into the real story behind the headlines. Turn off the fake news, trust your instincts, and never apologize for loving your country. We are the majority. We are the people. And we are not going anywhere.